Hey guys, I drove all the way to Byron Bay just to check out this property. It is a nice little boutique complex with a few shops, showrooms. Let's go and have a look. All right, I picked a pretty bad day for an inspection. It's raining, got here a little bit late, so all the shops are closed. But anyway, still pretty good complex in my opinion. I better get out of the rain. Oh my goodness. So this property here in Byron Bay presents pretty well. It's about 740 square meters. There's about 8 tenancies. There's showrooms, there's cafes, there's accounting firms, etc. So pretty good tenancy mix. The asking price is 4.5 million, which seems to be fair market price, but potentially we might be able to get it for a little bit better. Now, what is the real upside here? The real upside is a couple of things. One is you can see behind me, there's a bit of a vacancy here. So, there's an opportunity to fix up some of these vacancies and re-let it and increase the rental. The other thing is potentially, just given the way it's been set up, it lends itself to strata subdivision. So that's also something that we could potentially run the numbers and see where it stacks up. But all in all, it presents pretty well. I mean, it was fully refurbished in 2020. The building's in pretty good nick. I couldn't see any potential building problems in there, but obviously we'll need to get a building inspector to go in there and have a real good look at it. But from face value, look, it presents pretty well. It's in a pretty good spot in Byron Bay, and for this sort of price, it presents pretty good yield up. So look, when I go back to the office, I'll run the numbers and I'll show you guys how this deal could potentially stack up. All right, so I'm back to the office and I've just opened up the spreadsheet. So let's have a look at the numbers and see whether it would actually stack up. Now, as you can tell from the video that you just saw, and the building's in pretty good condition. It lends itself to potential strata subdivision. There's a few vacancies in there, but the bones are pretty good. So what about the numbers? So let's have a look at our feasibility, which we spend a lot of time on, and let's try to understand where are the opportunities and what are the strategies that we can use to value and actually make some decent money out of this project. Okay, so let's have a look at the top line here. So that's the subject property. This is the building size. This is the land size. That's the current rent because there's 3 shops that are vacant at the moment, which equates to about $253 per square meter. So really, really low. They've got an asking price of 4.5 mil, which equates to 4.17% net yield. Now, I wouldn't buy this property for $4.5 million because the yield's too low. But let's work out, all right, well, what is the market rent and what's the market sales price for a property like this, so we can determine and we can formulate an opinion on what this property would actually be worth. So let's have a look at the rent. Now, this property is pretty unique because it sits on a very specific zoning, which is the E4 zoning. It is not a traditional retail zoning, nor is it a traditional industrial zoning. An E4 zoning allows neighborhood shops, so neighborhood shopping centers, which is precisely what this property is. But because this neighborhood shopping center sits within an industrial precinct, we have to look at both retail properties and industrial properties and office space to formulate a proper view on what this property is actually worth. So we looked at a bunch of properties on the market and a bunch of properties that have transacted, deals have transacted. And to be honest, in the last 12 months, there hasn't been a lot of deals because the market is still relatively tight. Well, at least comparable deals, I should say. But, there's still enough evidence for us to formulate a decent view on what the property is worth on a rental perspective and what the property is worth on a sales perspective. So as you can see, there's been a bunch of properties sold in the last 12 months, and we're looking at strata properties as well as freeholds, which allows us to formulate an opinion on what the property should be worth. So looking at all these per square meter rates on rental and also per square meter rates on land and build and what sort of yields been achieved, we've been able to formulate a view and we'll adopt these numbers basically. So we are of the opinion that based on the evidence that we've collected, that the market rent for a property like this in Byron Bay, neighborhood shop, in this industrial precinct should be somewhere between $450 to $500 per square meter. That's what the market rent should be. In terms of price per land, it should sit somewhere between $2,500 to $3,000 per square meter. Price per square meter of build for a freehold property should sit somewhere between $6,000 to $6,500 per square meter. Now, if this property was strata subdivided, it should get probably somewhere between $7,000 to $7,500 per square meter. So this is important to note as we go through this feasibility. So based on the asking price of $4.5 million, the rate per square meter of land works out to be $28.16, which is within range. And price per square meter on build is about $6,077, is also within range. Now, as I mentioned earlier, 4.5 is not what I would recommend paying for it. I would probably recommend paying closer to $3.8 million, which makes a lot more sense, both from an acquisition and from a yield basis. Because the issue is, with these vacancies, if you went to the bank at $4.5 million, the bank's going to say, well, you've only got 4.17% yield. I won't be able to lend you a lot of money, right? You probably want 50% equity or deposit for this type of property. However, if I went to the bank and say, hey, look, I'm buying for $3.8 million and I've got a 5% initial passing yield, then you might be able to borrow a better amount of money to actually acquire this property. Because, sure, you can buy this property for $4.5 million, but you have to put in your $2.5 million of your own money. Then you might say, well, if I've got $2.5 million of cash, I could probably buy another property with better opportunities. So I don't want to do that. So at $3.8 million, it starts to make sense, and I show you the rationale and numbers behind it. But before we do that, let's have a look at the tenancy schedule. So there's, let me just zoom out a little bit. Okay, so there's a number of shops, 1 cafe and 2 offices, and 3 of the shops are vacant. So as you can see here, these are all the various tenants in various sizes. These are the lease expiries. Now, please note, every single tenant expires within 2 years. So some within the next 6 months, some in 12, some in 18, some in 24 months. No one has an option except for the cafe. Everyone else doesn't have an option. So which means there's an opportunity to go in there and correct the rents once these leases expire. So the current rent, as you can see, sits anywhere between like $295 a square meter, excuse me, all the way to $555 per square meter. So it's a bit all over the place. There's an opportunity to acquire the property and lease out the vacancies straight away. So one of the priorities will be to spend the next few months leasing out the vacancies so that we can bring the passing rent from $187,000 to almost $300,000. And that's based on a conservative $450 per square meter rental. All right, don't forget, we've adopted $450 to $500 per square meter. Now, if we started to, if we are able to successfully lease out the vacancies, then automatically the passing income on a yield basis is almost 8% on $3.8 million, which is pretty good for New South Wales and Byron Bay. There is further opportunity to increase the rent as well, because as we can see, like some of these tenants, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are paying below market rent. So as the tenant's lease becomes, as the lease expires, we'll hit each one of these tenants with a market review, which should bring the rent to about $342,000. So this would be probably, a sort of 18 to 24 month exercise, but the end product, we're able to get about $342,000 in rent, which equates to about a 9% net yield based on the asking price, which is pretty good. So what does that all mean? So if we are successful in leasing out all the vacancies and correcting all the rents and bringing it all to market, and based on a very conservative 6% cap rate, don't forget, properties have been sold for between sort of 5 and 5.25. But let's assume that the cap rate softens a little bit over the next 2 years, and we're using a really conservative 5.75% cap rate. The property should be worth, almost $6 million, which isn't too difficult to imagine because this property was sold just 3 years earlier for $5,250,000. So for this property to be worth $6 million is not too far of a stretch of an imagination. So we know what the upside is, which is, let's call it $6 million. And we know that we should buy it, we should enter at about 3.8. Well, how much is it going to cost us? And what sort of level of effort will be required to realize this value add opportunity, to realize this upside? So that brings us to this. So if we are going for a lease renewal, not a strata subdivision, then this is what you're up for. So we've got obviously we've got you got acquisition costs, which is $3.8 million. You got stamp duty and you got some closing costs. And this closing cost will include your legal fees, your building inspections, and so forth. So all up, you're in for about $4,018,000. It's going to cost us a bit of money to do the leasing campaign. So we've got leasing fees that's payable to the agent. We've got lease incentives that's payable for incoming tenants. And I've been very conservative with these numbers at 20%. We've got interest payments over the next 2 years at 7% interest only. We don't have any refurb or make good because the property's already done the refurb and looks in pretty good condition. Obviously, we've got outgoings that we need to account for. But we'll also be collecting rent over the next 24 months, which is amazing. So the leasing cost gets a little bit will be offset a little bit by the rental income. So it's going to cost about $127,000 to run the leasing exercise. So all up, the project cost is going to be about $1,150,000. If we adopted a conservative property value at $5.7 million as opposed to $5.95 million, then we can expect almost $1.6 million in value uplift, which equates to about 37% over 2 years' time, which is pretty good. Now, if we look at the strata subdivision strategy, then this is kind of what it looks like. So obviously you've got the same acquisition costs. You've got DA and legal fees to perform the strata subdivision. The legal fees will include you're putting together the bylaws, registering the strata title, and obviously you've got interest payments, etc. And you've got obviously some rental income to offset this. So all up, your cost to run the strata subdivision is almost $4 million. Now, if we were able to sell the property, the strata property, for $7,250 per square meter, then we would have a gross realization of about $5.4 million, which would give us about a $1.45 million profit. So the profit margin is very similar, whether we do a strata or whether we do a rental renewal uplift. So they're both pretty sound strategies. What I would recommend is actually doing both. So let's do the lease renewal because that's obvious. But in the background, maybe we'll try to subdivide it so that what we could do as an exit is maybe we'll sell half of it or sell 3/4 of these property. And then you can keep 2 of these properties unencumbered. Okay, so maybe you sell these ones and then keep the offers, or maybe you sell these ones and keep these 2 shops. So potentially, you can have 2 or 3 of these shops completely debt free. That's paying you rental income, perpetually. So that's pretty exciting. So look, I think the numbers do work, not at $4.5 million, but it could work at about $3.8 million. Now, in terms of cash flow, if we're buying at $3.8 million, it's probably going to cost, it's probably going to require about $1.7 million in capital, because you got to buy the property and you got some leasing costs or some capex to be spent. So about $1.6 to $1.7 million to buy this property. So yeah, so $1.7 million in. You wait 2 years and you come up with about $1.6 million in profit, which is not bad, in my opinion. So look, these numbers do stack up. I quite like it. This is probably something that I will recommend to a client. And if you're interested, have a look at some of these numbers, have a look at the area. And if you have any questions, drop it on the comments. More than happy to answer it. And if you want to find similar value add opportunities, then visit my website, propertylines.com.au, and more than happy to have a chat with you.